Afternoon from London and welcome to the Nest Centre Midweek Briefing. I'm John Lough, the Head of Foreign Policy. Today's subject is the Russian economy, and the trigger for our discussion is the draft budget for 2026 and the plan for 2027 and 2028 that was submitted to the State Duma earlier this week. The draft budget projects that GDP will grow 1.3% in 2026, and that over the three-year period, there will be growth of 7%. And to some, perhaps, this forecast may look a little optimistic on the assumption that the war in Ukraine will continue for a good while. Many observers believe that the economy is already in recession, and they cite the fact that several of the resources that have supported economic growth since 2022 have in fact been exhausted, and the labor shortage here is one important factor. The government says that the most important focus of the budget is the financing of measures to improve Russia's demography, including increased investment to support the national projects labeled family and long and active life. These are two of the 20 projects that are supposed to boost Russia's socioeconomic development up to 2030. In the short write-up on the government website that announced the submission of the draft budget to Parliament, there's no mention of the need to finance the war in Ukraine. To explain how the Ministry of Finance is juggling its priorities and what its approach says about the overall condition of the economy, we're delighted to have with us today Nest Centre's Head of Economics, Sergey Aleksashenko, who is one of Russia's top macroeconomists. Many of our viewers know Sergey's work and may know him personally. For those who don't, I should just say that Sergey's biography speaks volumes. He was the Deputy Minister of Finance in the early 1990s and later first Deputy Chairman of the Russian Central Bank. He has sat on numerous boards of Russian state and private companies, and he has also had in parallel a distinguished career as an academic and indeed an author. And I should point out that his latest book has just been published in English and bears the title Post-Cold War Russia and the Missed Opportunity for Global Stability. It examines in detail how and why Russia's relations with the West in the 1990s failed to achieve their potential. Before we go any further, I should remind our viewers that we have a chat function here for questions and for you to put your questions and any comments, and I will do my very best to get to you. So Sergey, thank you very much for joining us. I know that you've been poring over the draft budget, so let's get started. My first question to you is, what does this budget tell us about the state of the Russian economy after more than 3.5 years of war?
John, good afternoon. Very nice to be with you. I cannot tell you that you are inviting me because we are partners with Nest. And still, I am very glad to be with our audience and trying to explain that nothing serious is going in the Russian economy except of its slowing down. So the growth is evaporating, and it's not a big secret. Even Putin acknowledged this, but he says that this is our plan. Our Russian economy, according to him, was overheated by the end of 2024, and that means that the central bank needed to implement special efforts to cool economy down. Nevertheless, if we look a year back to the draft budget of the 2025, nobody envisaged overheating, nobody envisaged cooling. So it's a good word, using another word, but he understands, Putin understands, the Kremlin understands that economy is not growing anymore. Of course, we can debate, is 1% growth that Rosstat, Russian Statistical Agency, declared as the result of the first half of the year, is growth, is it stagnation, is it recession? But to my mind, it's not very important, because it's about statistical numbers. We should recognize that Russian economy, being a developing economy, should grow 3 to 4% annualized. So 1% is definitely below its potential, and the biggest the biggest problem, three problems of why economy is growing so slow. It's first, of course, is war. And the Russian government spends a significant amount of money, 35% of its budget to finance the war. That means that the government withdraw money from the civilian economy, let's say from non-military economy, and injects it into to the war. Second is the very high interest rate of the central bank, very tough monetary policy. That was the reaction on the spike of inflation in beginning of 2024. And this rate, of course, cools down many sectors of the economy, like construction, or residential construction, or new car sales, and agricultural machinery leasing, and so on. And the civilian sectors of the economy, they demonstrate recession since the beginning of this year. And the third one is not very comfortable. Okay, we may say that's a result combination of more or less stable oil prices that are about 65 on average dollars per barrel during this year. And there's still the pressure of sanctions, extra expenditures, logistical expenditures of Russian oil companies. That results that for the Russian budget, the oil price is about $60 per barrel. But since the end of the last year, ruble appreciated significantly. It's appreciated more than 35%, and that resulted in the decline of oil revenues and VAT on imported goods. So all in all, this resulted in contraction of the economy in the first quarter and a very, very slow rebound in the second quarter. So Minister of Economics is optimistic, Minister of Optimism, and they should say, okay, this year 1%, next year 1.3, then 1.6. So that is the rebound of the economy. That's it. You may use the word you like more.
Okay, understood. But just thinking about the pressures on the Ministry of Finance at the moment, I mean, is the budget deficit of particular concern?
I would say that the particular concern for outside observers is unorthodox policy, fiscal policy of Russia as a country during the time of the war. Usually, governments financed the war by borrowing, because war, one way or another, is a temporary exercise. Sooner or later, the war should end, and there is no request, there is no significant need to increase the tax rates, because if you increase tax rates, it's forever. Then the Russian government tries to implement war, spending huge amount of money, and fiscal consolidation. So the Minister of Finance has an orthodox view since the crisis of '98 that the budget deficit should be low and the state debt should be limited. And Putin accepted this approach, and the government tried to consolidate budget to reduce budget deficit in 2025, but failed. And I would not blame the budget significantly on growing expenditures. Mostly it was related to the loss of revenues because of the appreciated ruble. Nevertheless, as a result of this year, Minister of Finances forecasted budget 2.6% of GDP. That is 4.5 times bigger than it was forecasting a year ago. Still, if fiscal consolidation failed in 2025, it should be executed in 2026, and the budget deficit should be 1.6% of 1.3% of GDP next year. That means government plans to reduce expenditures by 1 percentage point of GDP and to increase tax rates by another 0.7% of GDP. So the government is not worried by the budget deficit as well. In general, we should recognize that the budget deficit does not mean that the government has no money to finance its expenditures. That means that the government should borrow money. So Minister of Finance is rather reluctant, understanding that by the end of 8 months, the budget deficit was 4.5%, 4.2 trillion rubles. So till the year and another 1.5 trillion, it's doable. It's not a great problem. So the budget of this year will be financed. Yes, the budget deficit will be big in nominal numbers, but it's not a great concern for the Minister of Finance.
Yeah, so I mean, that sounds pretty manageable and suggests that if you look at the economy from this angle, it's still, in fact, surprisingly resilient given the pressure it's been under.
Yes, John, I said it many times and I can repeat it that yes, Western sanctions, oil sanctions, and any other, they do harm Russian economy. They do limit Russian long-term growth. But in the current run, the sanctions is they increase the transactional cost of the Russian economy. So to sell Russian oil, you need to pay more for the logistics. You need to accept discount to Indian or Chinese companies. Nevertheless, you are not limited in selling your Russian oil. So yes, it's a pressure. It's not very comfortable, but it's manageable and it's not a concern.
Understood. I mean, one of the mysteries of the budget always is defense spending, because that part of the budget is heavily classified. But we understand that overall defense spending is in fact going to be slightly reduced in 2026, even if the spend on, I think, national security and defense as a whole is going to increase slightly. So it's very unclear what this sort of really means. Do you have any insights?
My understanding of this situation is that the budget we see is the presentation of the budget Kremlin wants us to see. It's not the real budget. Since the beginning of 2023, the Russian government has classified the breakdown of the expenditures of the budget, and we don't know where government spent money even in 2023, how much it spent on national defense in 23 and 24, in the first 8 of May 25. So we know only what government plans or declares to spend on the military, the national defense or security or any other items. Moreover, according to the current law, budget, the government can shift expenditures, let's say, from healthcare to national defense and not implementing changes into the legislation, to the law and the budget. And even more to that, Minister of Finance may declare some of the revenues as extra revenues exceeding budgetary forecasts. And if these revenues appear, if Minister of Finance declares that we have extra revenues, it's not going to the ordinary budget. It's going directly to the reserve fund of the president. The president himself spends money where he seems necessary. So I bet that it was in for the Minister of Finance. Minister of Finance was in the corner. Based on nominal numbers on the growth that Minister of Economy forecasted, there was no space to increase expenditures, let's say, for indexation of pensions, indexation of salaries, increasing interest expenditures on state debt, on subsidized credits that government is going to spend. And the only one way to increase all expenditures the government was committed was to reduce something or to increase the budget deficit. And Minister of Finances decided, okay, let's make a very unusual maneuver. Let's reduce expenditures on national defense, understanding that we may spend some of those money for national defense, let's say in December of this year. Okay, you're worried about the budget deficit of 5.7 trillion, but who will care about the budget deficit if it will be 6.5, for example, at the beginning of this year, and Putin, like a year ago, will declare, okay, we finance some expenditures for the next year. So I definitely not support the idea that the government has no money to finance the war. It's just a joke. It's a financial scheme to present the budget to make it look sustainable and acceptable for the State Duma.
Yeah, but at the same time, you're saying it is sustainable in economic terms to keep spending at this level.
It's very sustainable. It's very sustainable, and I will not be surprised if the government, if needed, Minister of Finance may increase the budget deficit. John, we should recognize that 1.3% of GDP as budget deficit, it's peanuts. Yeah, Russian government can have twice the size of the budget deficit and finance it from domestic borrowings or to reduce fiscal reserves or just cash into account. The Minister of Finance has approximately the size of the deficit for this year, something about 5 to 6 trillion rubles on its account permanently. Yeah, so if they reduce it by half, That means half of the budget deficit will be financed just by cash in the accounts. There is no need to borrow, but according to methodology, it will should be shown like a budget deficit. So it's not a problem to finance the budget deficit.
Okay. We have a question here from Joseph Dressen, who asks, is the damage to Russian oil facilities from drone attacks having a significant impact? And I think there's some suggestion that maybe 20% of Russia's refining capacity has been in some form damaged. These Ukrainian attacks are becoming more frequent. I saw news today that the US is going to give, I think, more targeting data to the Ukrainians to go after targets deeper in Russia, which would be a departure from previous practice. So do you see that there is any impact here? And it's not just the refineries, of course. The Ukrainians have hit export facilities in Primorsk and Ust-Luga.
On export facilities, I do not see any impact because according to international statistics who follow Russian export oil data, it's not declining. So I'm not very concerned about damage to Russian refineries regarding revenues of the Russian budget, because it's cynical, but for Russian oil companies, export of crude oil is more profitable than export of refined products. So if they are not able to refine or refined products, they will export crude and receive more money. So it's business is more cynical than real life. Damage to the refined products is significant, and I saw today's news that overall the reduction in refineries about a quarter, 24%, as a result of August and September. There is no official data because once again it is classified. If we take it as it is we should remember that Russia as an economy has the stock reserves of gasoline approximately 2 months production. So if Russia will use this reserve completely, it means that this quarter of monthly production will be okay. Russia can recompensate it by using reserves for now, let's say 6 months, for half a year. So there are several regions in Russia that declare they have shortage of gasoline, but from what I see, the biggest problem, the biggest trigger for this shortage is not the damage to refineries, but it's a fight for the market. Russian refineries, they are owned by big companies like Rosneft, Gazprom Neft, Tatneft, etc., Lukoil, Surgutneftegas, and they sell refined products to small gas stations, to independent gas stations. And independent gas stations purchase gasoline based on petroleum exchange prices. So if you want to remove the competitor from the market, you just increase the price on the exchange. That is very easy to do. Russian oil companies are obliged to sell 15% of their production on the petroleum exchange. Okay, if the price on petroleum exchange is higher than the price in the retail market, independent gas stations, they disappear. So that is the reason. If we read the reports of media, there is a shortage of gasoline in independent gas stations, not on the network gas stations owned by big companies. So there is a problem, and the government recognizes. Yesterday, the Deputy Prime Minister Novak said that we manage this control situation. We are looking attentively, and we we manage it by, let's say, individual decisions. So there is some damage, but it's very difficult to say what is biggest concern, what is the biggest result, either damage by Ukrainian attacks or by this fight for the market.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I hadn't sort of picked up on your point about the independent retailers and how there'll be a battle to put them out of business. That certainly does make sense. I mean, I think we should point out that I think Russia is already importing increased amounts of oil products from neighboring Belarus, which has significant refining capacity. and they can probably take it from elsewhere. So if the Ukrainians were to increase their attacks and let's say disable 30, 35% of capacity, there would still be other options to presumably try to alleviate the problem.
Yeah, okay. We see that about approximately 20 regions of Russia, they feel the shortage of gasoline. Yeah, is it significant? Yes. Does it result in any significant damage to the economy? No. We see that Russian inflation since the beginning of this year is something like 4%, 4.1, 4.2% accumulated, and the retail gasoline prices they increased 7.5%. Is it a big difference? Yeah, okay, it's double the difference, but 7.5%, it's not a huge damage to the economy.
Okay. We have a question from Ian Bond here from the Centre for European Reform, who asks, what accounts for the appreciation in the value of the ruble?
It's the biggest question. It's the biggest miracle. I would say that a couple of maybe let's say three main factors I can identify. First, of course, is the high interest rate of the ruble, the central bank, because even today it is 17%, and for the exporters, it's more profitable to sell foreign exchange to get rubles and to have a banking deposits receiving these lucrative yields. And this caused, in the beginning of the process, in the beginning of this year, a huge inflow of carry traders' money. Second problem is that Russian economy is, okay, as we discussed in the beginning, either recession or stagnation or just planned cooling. We don't know yet, but that results that import is stagnating. There is no demand for import, and the ruble is not devaluing as it should be when inflation is high than in the global markets. And the very last, it seems to me that there is a result of sanctions and administrative decisions of the Russian government. Historically, the exchange rate of the ruble was based on the trade or for foreign exchange trade on the Moscow currency exchange, or Moscow exchange as it's called today. And because of sanctions, the market disappeared because Moscow exchange is under sanctions. Its dollars and euros accounts are frozen. And so Chinese renminbi cannot be traded in a Moscow exchange as well, and the market shrinked. Yeah, so official market in Russia it's broken down. It's broken down in many segments, and a lot of foreign exchange transactions they moved outside of Russia. So some of Russian exporters, they are ready to sell their foreign exchange proceeds outside of the country, receiving rubles inside the country. So there is no market, and even not very significant amount of foreign exchange, like say $100 million, can move the exchange rate. So the market is very narrow, and that's why it's maybe not very representative. So, but once again, it's a biggest miracle, and even the central bank has no very clear understanding of what's going on.
But in terms of Russia's oil revenues coming to the federal budget, this is disadvantageous, is it not, to have a strong?
Yeah, of course, John. The Russian Minister of Finance lost, no, not lost, but did not receive huge amount of money because of appreciation of the ruble. As I said, in end November last year, the value of the dollar was 110 rubles. In mid this year, it was less than 80 rubles. So it's 40% appreciation of the ruble. It's very significant, and that's why when, if you remember, when we discussed the budget deficit for this year, I say it's not the I should not blame the Minister of Finance for that. It's not the losing control of over expenditures. Okay, they cannot affect. They can affect. Of course, they can affect the exchange rate. For example, they may allow foreign companies to repatriate some of their ruble proceeds that they keep in the account type S that are frozen, in fact, in Russia. But it's a political problem. Putin keeps this account frozen as a leverage on the potential acquisition of Russian frozen assets in Europe. So if Russian oil assets of the central bank will be confiscated one way or another. Putin issued a decree that, okay, and after that we will confiscate ruble accounts of non-residents that they have. So theoretically, the government could make ruble to weaken and to improve the situation with the budget deficit, with revenues, but it's political issues in the hands of Putin.
Okay. We have another question here from Donald Jensen in Washington, who says, can you give us an assessment, if possible, of expected spending on the security services, in inverted commas? He's put security services. Understood that that's broadly defined, and it's a complicated question. Do we have any indication of what would be spent on the security services?
Security means what? It's a KGB, Minister of Internal Affairs, or National Defense.
I think it's called national security, isn't it? So I guess it comes into that bucket.
I think it will be on the level of 40% of the budget. So there is no look. I said this, but once again, as a usual economist on the one hand, on the other hand, and I'm an economist, I have another hypothesis about why Putin accepted the national defense and means national security expenditures to be lower than the previous year. Okay, nobody knows when the war will end it. And Minister of Finance could say, Mr. President, we have plenty of money to finance the war as it is until the mid 2026. What will happen in the second half of the year, we don't know. But we promise you that we will give you as much money as you need for the war in the second half. But to make budget look nicely, let's accept that expenditures for the national defense will not increase. So we believe that 40% of the federal budget is on national security, including national defense, but it's rather stable during the time of the war.
Yeah, but we don't have a line item that's available to the public, at least, that tells us how much is being spent on the FSB, on the Rosguardia, on other structures.
No, we do not.
No, that doesn't surprise me somehow. Sergey, I wanted to come back to the question of sanctions, and as you know, there is still in some Western countries this great hope that if we can just apply a little bit more pressure to the Russian economy, then Putin will change his mind and come to the negotiating table. And I was struck by an article published by Mikhail Hodorkovsky this week in Politico, where he explained very bluntly that energy sanctions cannot bankrupt Putin's war machine, on their own. And he came up with a calculation. Trump has talked about, together with the Europeans, putting tariffs on both the Indians and the Chinese and trying to choke, Russian exports, oil exports to those countries, to choke those off. And Mikhail Hodorkovsky calculates that these measures would reduce budget revenues by $30 to $40 billion a year. And that's in the context of what he says is a budget of around $400 billion. So that would be a reduction of 10% maximum. So assuming let's go with those figures for a moment. If those are correct, I mean, how destabilizing would that be for 10% of the budget to be removed?
John, I'm sure that Mikhail Khodorkovsky knows. I'm not sure about you, that Russian budget is financed in rubles, not in dollars.
Well, indeed, we spoke about that just before, but I think for simplicity's sake.
Look. If Russian budget will receive, let's say, not $100 billion, but let's say $70 billion, what will happen with the exchange rate of the ruble? It will not be 80 rubles per dollar, but let's say 100 or 110. So in rubles, it will be the same amount. That's a very easy answer. If Russia will receive less revenues from export of anything, including oil and gas, Russian budget can compensate it with the exchange rate of the ruble. Of course, this will result in spike of inflation. So inflation may go to, let's say, 15, 20% annualized. Central bank will increase its rate, I don't know, 25% or 30%. So, of course, there will be effect. The problem is, can the West accept the elimination of, let's say, 5-7% of the oil in the global market. Who will substitute Russian oil? Nobody is ready. Saudi Arabia is not ready to break with the OPEC Plus agreement. And if it is in place, okay, Russia has its space to export oil and nobody can substitute it. So once again, I have to repeat, maybe there are some clever guys in the Western agencies in the United States, in Brussels, or in London, I don't know where, and they have some ideas how to implement more stronger sanctions than they are today. I don't know. I don't know. When I'm asked what else could be done, I say honestly, nothing. There are no economic sanctions that may affect Putin's economy anymore. There are political sanctions, there are military sanctions. You may block the Danish Straits. You'll not physically blockade Russian export of oil from Baltic Sea, from Primorsk and Ust-Luga, but it will be not economic sanctions. Maybe Ukrainian missiles may destroy completely export facilities in the Baltic Sea, but it's not economic sanctions. So can Russia economy be affected by the decline in export of oil and refined products? Yes, but not by economic sanctions.
Okay, Sergey, we're getting to the end of our session, but we've had a sort of cluster of questions and comments that have come in, and I'd like to get to those, and I think you can just be very brief in your response. Adam Kowalski asks, is there any indication of how the draft budget has been received in Russia so far? Well, I don't imagine that many people have read it, have they?
Russian people don't care.
Okay, and in the Duma itself, we've probably heard nothing. From Craig Kennedy says that Bloomberg has reported sources in 3 leading banks saying their actual loan losses are far worse than their public disclosures show. And Craig adds that makes sense since the central bank has suspended standard default monitoring and provisioning requirements for defense-related loans. And he adds that central bank data show that 23% of Russia's corporate ruble loan book is now soft credits to the arms manufacturers. And as he says, that's a lot of badly managed risk. Is it possible Russian banks aren't as healthy as some people argue?
Craig, very nice to hear from you. I would not rely on Bloomberg's data, Bloomberg's news. It's not data, it's news. Because in the recent couple of years, there were very many fake reports that are not related to the reality. I think that financial situation in the Russian banks is not comfortable, definitely because of the long time of the high key rate interest rates. They should have less profits and more problems with their borrowers. I do not believe that 23% of the loans are dedicated to military sector. It's much too much. Though there is a problem, and those loans are concentrated in one particular bank, Pромsvязьbank, that is owned 100% by the government. Do you believe that the government will allow such a bank to collapse? I do not. I believe that the government will spend as much money in different forms, either direct subsidies to the banks or writing off loans and so on and so forth. So I do not believe that in the banking system that is by 80% controlled by the government, there may be a financial crisis.
Okay, very good. Let's go just for a last question. And it is, how significant is the reduction of tax benefits for businesses? What role do small and medium-sized enterprises play in policy decisions, perhaps at the regional level? And are these cuts affecting certain regions more than others? So as I understand it, some of those tax benefits for the small and medium enterprises are disappearing in this current budget.
Yeah, that's true. Approximately a year before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Putin gave an interview where he said, small business, they're thieves and cheaters, all of them. So that's the attitude of the Russian government towards a small business. In fact, the small business plays significant role, and it helped Russian economy to sustain during the time of the initial wave of sanctions, building all those transactional schemes, parallel import, new logistics, and so on and so forth. And the main problem for the small business will be VAT, value added tax, will be imposed on those companies that will increase their bureaucratical transactional costs that will make their life more difficult. But Russian business will survive as any other. There is no other choice, yeah, because no one can substitute them. But as to the government, they don't care. They don't care because the share of revenues produced by the small business is insignificant for the budget, and that's why we may increase tax rates, we may decrease tax rates, we may provide different benefits for the small business, but we don't care, in fact.
So as a sector in the economy, how large is the small and medium enterprises? What percentage?
If we trust to Россtat, Russian statistical agency data, it's about 30% of the economy. But we cannot check. We cannot check and we cannot verify it. But I believe it's more or less correct.
Okay, but it's still, that's quite a significant chunk of the economy. Sergey, we need to stop there because we've run out of time. I want to thank you for being with us today, thank our viewers for joining, and to, of course, remind people that we'll be back next week, same time, same place. Thank you very much.
John, thank you, and thank you, our audience.